This video is sponsored by Squarespace. It's pretty common these days to see videos on YouTube talking about how miniatures are too expensive now. But are they really? And compared to what? Are we factoring rules into the equation, or just the raw materials and costs of casting and sculpting these things? And why are some of us willing to pay up to $50 or even $150 for one single model, and only about $2 for other models? There are a lot of questions to be answered here, a lot of meat to be chewed on this bone. And more than anything else, the point of this video is just to get you thinking about the amount of money we put towards this hobby and if it's really worth it. Part 1. Value depends on intention. The miniatures hobby is a vast one, and each of us have our own specific intentions for how we would like to interact with it. And this inevitably is going to affect our perceived value of the products that we're buying. For some of us, we just want to paint the pretty plastic models. And for those of us with this mindset, these are really just glorified model kits. Maybe we'll play the games attached to these models someday, but what we're really paying for is the opportunity to paint a cool model and maybe display it after. Maybe put it into a competition if that's your thing. For others, these tiny plastic soldiers are primarily game pieces. They have points, values, and statistics. And the painting itself might be more of a chore. Something that we enjoy sometimes, but more of a means to an end to get our game pieces to interact with the game. Still, others among us are primarily collectors, either collecting every single miniature they might conceivably need for their D&D campaigns, or perhaps seeking out every single limited edition or rare release for a favorite faction or nostalgic old game. And the list goes on. Some of us are primarily here for the lore, or to accrue parts to put into our kit bashing bin. And still others among us would never consider buying a physical miniature at all, because 3D printing is more efficient and cheaper. There are as many different reasons to buy miniatures as there are hobbyists in this hobby. And for most of us, we're going to be some combination of all of these archetypes. My point is, depending on your specific intentions, your use cases, you're going to value these things very, very differently. If you're only here for the game, for instance, you might not care about the quality of the sculpting. You might not really care if we get multi-part kits that we can kit bash with. And you might think that the models are overpriced for that reason. You might prefer your models even come pre-painted. If you're only here to paint, you might not care if a model is worth a lot of points, has really good statistics in a specific game, or is important in the lore, and think that the models are overpriced for that reason. And I could go on, but I think you get the point. Our intentions for what we want to do with an object affect its perceived value. Part 2. Value differs by game type. While a Warhammer player might be used to the idea of a group of 10 guys, or maybe 5 specialer guys, being worth about $50, with even more specialer models like heroes, vehicles, or monsters being worth way more than that sometimes, a Dungeons & Dragons player who mostly buys things like Reaper Bones, Nalzers, or even 3D prints might think that those prices sound ridiculous, and that all miniatures should cost between $2 and $3 each unless they're really big or something, and those miniatures better come pre-assembled. Not realizing that what the Warhammer player is really paying for is the multi-part plastic kits that can be used in different ways, the statistics behind that character, perhaps even the lore behind that character, or most likely a combination of all of these things. Meanwhile, both the Warhammer and the D&D player might be looking across the aisle at the Marvel Crisis Protocol player and be totally unable to comprehend why someone like me is willing to pay $50, sometimes more, for just 2 new figures, not realizing that even one of these figures can provide a completely new and different playstyle to our teams which are usually made up of between 4 to 6 characters in most cases. And it's like this with every game, every line of miniatures. The price of plastic, metal, or resin really has nothing to do with it. and the value of a miniature is more about its context in the market. The reason we complain or don't complain about miniature prices is because we have a certain expectation of what they're worth compared to similar products on the market. But personally, I've started to think about the value of the miniatures that I buy in a very different way, and it's really made me appreciate the value of any single miniature that I purchase. But before we do that, I would first like to tell you about an extremely high value product that I always appreciate the value of. That's right, it's this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website and hosting platform that's custom built for all of your website needs. And it's super easy to use. Just pick from one of their gorgeously designed pre-made templates, or take it step by step with their brand new design intelligence system, which guides you through the process of building a custom-built website tailored to your specific needs. I've been using my current Squarespace website to host a gallery of my painted miniatures, all of my painting reference documents, as well as an online store, which has been super easy to set up, keep updated, and accepts a variety of flexible online payment options. So if you need a website, why not check out squarespace.com today for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/DanaHowell for 10% off your very first purchase of a website or domain. Part 3, value per hour. If you are engaging with every aspect of the hobby, I'm talking about building, painting, playing, and collecting, then the price you are paying for most miniatures, even the more expensive ones, is very, very worth it in my opinion, at least when compared to most similar hobbies. Way back in the old days when playing and collecting video games was my main hobby, I used to think of it a little bit like this. If I was paying $60 for a game, and I got 60 hours out of that game, 60 hours of gameplay, I would think $1 per hour, that's good value. Whereas if I paid $60 for a game and I only got 10 or 20 hours of gameplay out of it, I would think that's not good value. Except in cases where those 10 or 20 hours were really, really fun, really, really high quality. And to be honest, that's kind of how I've started thinking about my miniature painting purchases. When purchasing a set of new miniatures, in my brain, I'm thinking, this is my main hobby. This is the main way that I spend my leisure time. So if I spend $50 on a new plastic kit, and I get at least 25 hours building, painting, customizing that kit, then I think to myself, $2 per hour? That's decent value. And much like in the video game example, if it was a really high quality experience, if I had a lot of fun building and painting and customizing that kit, I might be willing to pay even more than that. And that's not even counting the potential future hours of using these models to play games with my friends. Not only this, but a lot of miniatures, once painted, at least if you're happy with the paint jobs, can be companions for life. A really nice collection of miniatures can be used over and over again in many different games using many different rule sets over the course of a lifetime. And I think where we really start to feel ripped off as a consumer is if we're really only engaging with one aspect of the hobby. If you're only in it to play the game, if you're only in it to paint, or something like that, it's gonna feel like a lower value product. I have definitely encountered my fair share of people who've said they would love to get into miniatures games, but they don't want to have to buy something that they then have to assemble and paint before even starting to play. When for a lot of us, assembly and painting is part of the fun. So if you're fully engaged with this hobby, if you're having fun with every part of it, if you're engaged with the community, if you're playing games, I think it can be a really high value hobby, especially when compared to similar hobbies like Magic the Gathering, Lego, toy collecting, or even most board games. At least in terms of hours spent, I think you can get a pretty good value out of this hobby. I used to think of Warhammer specifically as a pretty expensive hobby, for instance. But now that I'm actively collecting and painting an orc army for big 40k, it's actually impressive how little it costs when you break it down in terms of monthly expenses, and also if you aren't buying your entire army at once, which I don't recommend. For instance, I'm trying to stick to a budget of about $50 per month for my orc army. And while I do go overboard sometimes, for the most part, I'm finding that spending about $40 to $60 per month on a new kit, and then assembling and painting that kit, and then buying myself a new kit whenever I finish that first one, is a pretty sustainable practice, a pretty fun way to approach the hobby. If you've always wanted to play one of the big games like 40k, I highly recommend this method, especially if you have a group of friends to meet up with every few weeks and paint and play with. I would highly recommend it. I think you should try it out. It can be an extremely rewarding and high-value hobby in my experience. And for most armies, if you're just buying and painting a single unit every month over the course of a year, I think you'll be surprised at how big of an army you can build over the course of 12 months. That is, of course, depending on how fast you paint and how much time you have to put into it. But I believe in you. I think you can do it. And the same is true for most miniatures games. With a budget of about $50 per month, I think you're going to have a good amount of stuff to paint that month, and a good amount of stuff to play with within a few months. Not only this, but the value is even greater when you consider that a lot of these models hold their value on the secondary market, especially if you're playing a Warhammer game. So if you are collecting a certain army but you find that you're not enjoying them that much, or you want to switch it up, you can always sell your army and reuse that money to buy a different army. So yeah, how much is a miniature worth? I think about $5. But aside from that, I think you really get out of this hobby what you put into it, and I would love to hear from you down in the comments what you think a single miniature should be worth. And that's not even getting into whether rules should be free, whether rules are factored into this price. That's a whole other conversation to have. As always, thank you to all of our wonderful patrons for your constant and ongoing support. I really appreciate it. If you're looking for a like-minded community to talk about stuff like this, share your painting and get advice on painting, you can join our extremely inclusive Discord server over at patreon.com/DanaHowl. And with that, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.